The parliamentary elections in Czech Republic ended and we know the results. The NU party led by the billionaire and media mogul Andrej Babis won. And we have with us the non-residential fellow of the Atlantic Council, Maxim Eristavi. Maxim, hi, thank you for joining us. So the NU party won, and while they are celebrating the victory, the traditional parties kind of lose. I mean, Social Democrats, for example. How did it happen? What makes people to back new powers, especially populists and rightists?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, the victory of ANO movement is, first and foremost, is just victory in numbers, because what you can say for sure at the moment that the political fragmentation won the election in Czechia. At the moment, we have the record number of parties entering the parliament since the restoration of democracy in the country, and we have ANO leading with less than 30% of votes, which by any means a credible majority, and other parties that actually constitute the parliament at the moment or about to have between 5 and 10%. So what is happening in Czechia at the moment is actually political fragmentation, and the rejection of mainstream parties that is happening all around the continent enters the country as well. And a lot of voters, they're confused and trying to find alternatives, but at the same moment, there is no overarching alternative emerging on a political front. So that's why we have so many parties, non-systemic alternative parties winning the elections, but at the same time, no kind of big majority party emerging from this process.
And many have concerns about right powers coming to parliament in the Czech Republic. For example, Tomio Okamura Party Freedom and Direct Democracy have almost like 10%. And what influence they can have in the parliament, and should we be worried about that?
Well, it's very interesting that Czechia is experiencing the same kind of political tectonic shifts as other countries in many parts of the world. So basically, the previous dimension between right and left policies ceased to exist, and now the discourse is more about being open or closed country. Therefore, there is nobody debating about economy or trade or economic integration, because actually Czechia is one of the countries that benefits almost the most from that process. They have the lowest unemployment, one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. They have a terrific economic growth. But the issue specifically about social paradigm and migrants is something that bothers. And it's, as you can see with the win of far right, which is extremely good record for them, but at the same time, it's still just 10%, which is quite marginal, says a lot about the popular anti-migrant message. But at the same time, as you know, today's joke among a lot of observers here that the Party of Freedom and Direct Democracy, this far-right party, won 22 seats in the parliament, and the number of actually migrants, refugee seekers from Islamic countries that Czechia accepted so far is just 11. So we see that all these anti-migrant messages have quite populistic nature and have nothing to do with actual situation on the ground. Basically, Czechia is not very popular with refugees or migrants at the moment.
And Babis is often compared to Donald Trump, the president of the United States. What can you say about that? Yes, he is as well a billionaire, media mogul, and he used the same rhetoric in his pre-election campaigns about anti-migrants and anti-establishment. What can you say? Why media compare them, and what are the similarities and differences between them?
Well, in my personal experience, when you see a headline that says "Check Trump" or something like that, I think it's a bad example of really lazy foreign journalists, because Babis is anti-systemic, anti-mainstream candidate, but he is nothing like Trump in a way that he is running, or he's entering the parliament not to destroy the system, but actually skillfully manipulate and to top this system. Therefore, he's a very good and skillful tactician. So during his campaign and now during the coalition talks, what we see is him actually trying to talk to everybody and try to figure out this perfect formula, fitting formula for a coalition that will work for him first and foremost. The other important thing that, very often, especially Russian propaganda, tries to portray him as an anti-European politician, which he is not. And actually, anti-European messages here in Czechia would not work at all because, again, Czechia benefits from European integration. But he's using this really weird combination of being pro-European, pro-NATO, but at the same time anti-migrant, which in this particular case worked perfectly for him. But again, I do not want to overestimate his power within the parliament, because to rule, he needs to compile a coalition. And to do that, he needs to talk both to far right, to mainstream parties, and to far-left parties, like, for example, Czech Pirates, that gained enormous number of seats and now is the third biggest party in the country, running on liberal messages. So let's not overestimate the win for far-right messages or anti-European messages here.
And how do you see the future cooperation within the parliament? There will be so many different powers, right, left, centrist, and others. What we should expect in foreign policy in the EU? What about Euro and also like migrants? And what about Ukraine?
Well, as you can imagine, with such insane fragmentation within the parliament, it's going to be extremely difficult to find consensus at the moment. And I think the question number one, whether Babis will form coalition with the former mainstream party, centrist right or centrist left, or he will go to more radical parties, both on left and the right spectrum. And it will make his ruling and his governing extremely difficult for sure. But when it comes to foreign policy, which is, another interesting aspect, he had a mixed baggage of messages he sent out on Russia, on, the invasion of Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, European messages that many see as he's trying to maneuver and to create a bigger room for possible cooperation in future. So I think we will see his emerging foreign policy in months to come, and it will depend first and foremost on the breakdown of coalition he will be able to compile. If it's going to be a coalition with mainstream parties, former ruling mainstream parties, central right and central left, the policy towards Ukraine or towards Russia probably won't change at all. If it's going to be coalition with far rights and communists, which is also a distant possibility, then obviously we'll see a bit of tilting towards Russia. But overall, considering the background of Ano and Babis, I don't think that we will see a great change in foreign policy towards Russia and Ukraine at the moment, because Babis is not so strong in foreign policy, but he also doesn't want to rock the boat too much to upset a lot of European partners as well. So it's going to be a balance no matter what kind of coalition will emerge.
And talking, for example, about presidential elections in 3 months that will take place in Czech Republic, what can you say? If Zeman will become president again, do you think there will be some change in politics, or still the politics towards Russia, will stay the same? Because Zeman is known for his really strange things he's talking about. For example, he proposed Ukraine to sell Crimea.
Well, the important thing to understand is about the balance between president and parliament in Czechia. And when it comes to foreign policy, presidential powers are not so important as powers of prime minister or the government or the parliament. So we've seen a lot of probably upsetting for most Ukrainian statements from President Zeman in recent months or even years. but it doesn't mean that there is any policy behind it. Moreover, if you look at the record of the Czech government in previous years, for example, the incident with the so-called embassy of Ukrainian separatists in Czechia that was closed down thanks to government help, the efforts to combat fake news and Russian propaganda, and also the support for basically European progressive forces in Ukraine. This record shows that there's more support inside Czechia towards progressive forces in Ukraine than you might take from Zeman's words. And I think, yes, with Czechia being so politically fragmented after these elections, you'll probably see a less robust foreign policy when it comes to especially Russia and Ukraine in coming years. But at the same time, if you see at the progressive forces that also expanded room within the parliament, for example, the top 9 liberal political party, Pirate Party in the parliament that all run on liberal, progressive, pro-European messages, you can find some new allies within Czech parliament starting from now when it comes to Ukraine and when it comes to the geopolitical storm in the region.
And the last question, Czechia is known as a kind of field for using Russian propaganda. Have you experienced or have you noticed any disinformation campaigns, fake news that can influence these elections? And have Russia any interest in these elections in Czechia?
Well, Czech elections is a tragic example of the fallout from fake news and orchestrated fake news campaigns in Eastern Europe. In this particular case, as we all know, propaganda, modern propaganda, it does not try to convince people, but more than to confuse people, and it uses these political storms like it is in Czechia to confuse voters even more. Therefore, for example, the analysis of Atlantic Council and Bellingcat actually exposed more than 40 media, local media that have direct or indirect ties to Russian organizations or Russian propaganda media outlets. And it creates a lot of confusion because, again, it's natural for voters who try to reject mainstream party to seek alternative parties, but also with that kind of process, they seek alternative information sources. And then it's very easy for propaganda outlets to grab their attention, calling themselves alternative. And that's why we see such a big confusion, even on behalf of voters who have those dozens of new media outlets who actually fake propaganda shells. And they consume that information and creates more confusion and more political disturbances. And I think Czechia today is an unfortunate example how you can affect electoral process by creating more informational confusion.
Thank you, Maxim. We'll be following the development in Czechia and we'll be following the events in Eastern Europe.